Welcome to the Indignants, October 7th, 2011. I'm Mike Roy.
And I'm Sean Forster.
I'm Sombo Saba.
And Anthony Verberkmos.
Today we're going to cover the Indignants movement, the Occupy movement. So who wants to pick up on the... actually, Anthony, that'd be perfect for you to pick up on the Indignants. Would you like to do that?
Sure. Well, as a radical watching this year, I'd say since January, it's just been really exciting to watch a wave of protest and insurrection and rioting across the world, starting in January in Tunisia, and then expanding to Tahrir Square and across North Africa and the Middle East, and since then reigniting Greece and Spain and a lot of the rest of Europe into a movement that's mostly become known as the Indignants. And they're really not traditional in their approach. They're really not traditional in their demeanor. They reject all political class as corrupt and welcome left and right, middle class and poor, the 99%.
This is more like
the owners.
A non-left, non-right type thing too, isn't it?
Right. They don't, like people within the movements are still left and right, but as a movement, right, it's sort of, if you've ever seen the political compass, instead of seeing things left and right, they're seeing it on the other axis of authoritarianism and freedom. And this is just a group that wants to push down the old system, I think, and create something that's freer. And this movement now is come to North America in the Occupy movement. So it's now here on our doorstep. So these are exciting times.
I think it's kind of interesting, too, that the whole movement that was going on and the austerity and all that stuff in Europe really wasn't publicized all that much over here in the West. You only got to see maybe a few things in Greece when they were trashing stuff, basically. Mm-hmm. But all the stuff in Spain and Portugal... You know, and it didn't even make the news here.
Well, yeah, especially in Greece, like what you don't see, what will never make the news is the essentially large general assemblies they have there, the university occupations where people can freely come, discuss many diverse issues that they all face. This kind of positive stuff of building communities doesn't get as much play in the media because it's not sensational. If
it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead.
It gets glossed over, and unless there's violence in a foreign country, then why should we care? Pretty much. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same with Portugal right now as well. I mean, like there's hundreds of thousands of people on the street in Portugal with the cops joining them, and I only saw one article on like maybe an indie media site about this. I mean. And especially how media treats the Wall Street protests too. I mean, there was complete blackout until like a week or two. Now it's turned into a media circus.
It's kind of interesting too that a lot of the M15, the Spanish Revolution, and the Indignants movement in Europe. I think they took a lot of their cues from Egypt and some of the ways that the protests were going there, because I know they were protesting before in Greece. Even prior to this with some of the austerity measures, but wasn't really the same thing. I think what happened in Egypt and Tunisia kind of influenced Spain, which actually influenced Greece afterward.
Yeah, for a lot of the more mainstream people or people new to resistance, I'd say that is really true. But I mean, at the same time, both of those countries have real rich histories of fighting back against dictatorships and that. So what you might describe as a smash and grab attitude, I'd say, yeah, that's a militant reaction built up off of that history. And both those countries are rich for it. But yeah, there is sort of a new movement that's taking a lot under its wing, and to a lot of people, they are influenced. At least the courage. I think the numbers we're seeing involved in all of these movements are encouraged through watching things in Egypt and all over through the Arab Spring.
What you call the Arab Spring has always been there. We do weekly protests, and it's very difficult because Palestine is split in numerous sections. So Palestine is very unique to other countries such as Egypt, where people would gather in one place, Tahrir Square. In Palestine, you
Well, you got a lack of mobility for one thing. Right?
There's restriction of movement. So, going from one village to another, movement is restricted, especially in the West Bank, where there are hundreds of Gazas that are emerging. People can't leave their village. People can't access resources. So if we do see protests, we see them in smaller scale. They could grow bigger if there was
a way for them all to get together.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's very inspiring how they do get together, especially in Nabi Saleh, which is a village that faces home raids on a consistent basis. There's a settlement right across from the village, and villagers are afraid that the settlement will expand and take over their village. Every week, they're there every Friday after their prayers, fighting for their land back. Now, it's interesting that we brought up Egypt, and my question is the media doing a good job in covering Egypt now? Is the media, doing a good job covering Tunisia now? There are still struggles, and people are still presently showing up in Tahrir Square, yet, no media coverage at all. And, there was a little conspiracy theory, too, with Egypt, is that did the media help with Hosni Mubarak leaving? Because we had so much coverage of Egypt. It wasn't as much, but still, when they did catch on, that's all that you heard. Egypt. We didn't see the same results in Tunisia because the media wasn't latching on to Tunisia as it was latching on to Egypt. So there are numerous questions we have to think about. Is the media controlling our revolution?
To me, the most interesting part of the whole Indignants thing, the most significant part of the whole Indignants movement is the assemblies. It's the occupation, as cool as it is, really is sort of secondary to me. The fact that people are getting together and deciding things in an openly democratic way for themselves, without the state, without any kind of hierarchies, hopefully. That's, to me, a beautiful thing and a great step forward. And anything else that comes from that is just secondary and built off of that.
The media also don't seem to understand the dichotomy. Like they'll accuse the Wall Street protesters and other people of because they are leaderless movements, they're non-hierarchical, of being anarchists, and then covering them being like, oh, look, like they're so organized, they couldn't possibly be anarchists. But this is a long tradition. Anarchists have a long tradition of organizing non-hierarchically in these fashions, and across entire regions, like in the previous Spanish Revolution. And it worked quite well, but there seems to be kind of like a historical ignorance towards like some people are like, oh, this started with Zeitgeist or
amnesia,
the Venus Project or something like that.
Went down the memory hole.
Yeah, and a lot of people have fear about that word anarchism too, right?
Autonomous Marxists too, like, not to be sectarian, like a lot of different people in movements in the past have organized non-hierarchically in this fashion.
The Paraconists.
It is a loaded word, but that also ties into the media portrayal of anarchists as like the bad guys, the bomb throwers. Like maybe a couple of anarchists threw bombs.
Just for our viewers or listeners that aren't really familiar with anarchy, other than smashing windows and grabbing TVs, give me.
That's really all we do.
Yeah, give us
our weekend.
Give us a quick little synopsis of what anarchism is.
I don't know. I like if you're looking for an in a nutshell version of what it means, I like Chomsky's reply that it's really challenging authority on every level, every chance you get, and questioning whether it's legitimate. And if it's really legitimate, like if I'm walking along and a little child goes to run out on the road, me grabbing them and pulling them back is a form of coercive authority, but I would say that's a pretty legitimate form. So that's just an example, if you think something makes sense to have a certain degree of hierarchy or a certain degree of authority, then that could be said, or it's answerable.
So basically,
responsible
participatory democracy,
right? Which we would be strong advocates of. But yeah, in all forms, like at home, domestically, we would say parental authority needs to at least be checked by being questioned. Male authority over females, anything like that needs to constantly be checked.
I think it comes from the best traditions of the Enlightenment, of constantly questioning our society and ourselves. So back in the day, it was mainly concerned with class issues as well, because it's extremely pressing with the lead up of fascism, the Great World Wars, and so many people dying. And now it's evolved into more of a new direction where it's also about class issues, but it's about the intersectionality of a lot of different issues, and more concerned with domination. And there are many, many different types.
So as an anarchist looking at this movement that's come from Europe and the indignants over to the occupation movements here, one thing that we would be looking to do is keep people aware that they're not only challenging corporations, but also challenging state authority. That you're opening the door to one pillar of authority if you're only targeting the other. That we can't just call for a bigger, more of a big brother state to look out for us, or we're inviting a new form of oppression there.
I think that most people can agree on something like that.
If they understand the issues, I think they would.
The occupation movement in North America arguably could be stated that it started in Wisconsin and moved to the Occupy New York or Occupy Wall Street, and now is in
or
at least
Empire Windows in Chicago. You remember?
No.
No?
No.
Right after the economic collapse, there was a window. It's in Michael Moore's movie Capitalism, A Love Story, even where this window company went under or was moving, shutting down operations anyways, and going to leave the employees high and dry. And so they occupied the factory just to get a severance package. A lot of radicals were saying, occupy it and take it over, like in the movie The Take, where the employees take right over the factory and keep running it. But they ended up just taking over in the factory to get their pay, their like severance packages. And Obama even came out on their side. And if I remember, a lot of the early Wisconsin stuff was sort of drawing on that even. So they got inspired from other places. So there's definitely a chain there. I'd
actually probably argue that in North America it kind of started with maybe the Zapatistas in '94 and the liberation of the autonomous zones in Chiapas and then later Oaxaca. That captured a lot of people's imaginations about what was possible about fighting back against neoliberal reforms that were taking their lands. And
January 1st, 1994, the day NAFTA kicked in, they declared open war.
I remember that, yeah.
And so it opened, really, I think Sean's right, for North America, that opened a new phase of resistance, because that inspired, like 5 years later, the Seattle protests that really sparked a new wave of protest in North America, followed by Quebec and things after that, and helped to revive the anarchist movement and the whole resistance itself.
The anti-globalist movement
right.
as well.
Which was set back after 9/11, but has reemerged.
We had some Londoners actually go down to the Occupy Wall Street movement recently, and they encountered some interesting moments on the Broklin Bridge. And Luckily, one of us here was one of those people. So a little bit of insight would be greatly appreciated as to kind of what went down when you were there.
I was on the bridge, yes. Why I was on the bridge was because I thought it was my bridge, and I need to be there.
And
Did you buy the Broklin Bridge?
It's our bridge, and I think that when enough people get together and say that, you know what, these are our streets, this is our bridge, we have every right to be there, people get scared. People want to listen, and that's why I was there. I wanted people to listen. There were so many people that were stuck, that got stuck in the protests, unfortunately, and for the police to unfairly arrest them as well, blanket them as protesters, they were charged as well. It was ridiculous that.
So watching the videos and hearing your guys' firsthand experience on it, it sounds like it was just you were going onto the Broklin Bridge. There was like a walkway, and then when it was really small and it was tight, and the crowd sort of just diverged, split and went onto the road as well. And the police were still accompanying.
Some say that the police led us to the bridge as a form of trapping us. And yes, we did get trapped, those that were on the bridge.
So they kettled you.
They did kettle us, and then they lied to us and said that if we give ourselves up willingly, there will be no charges. Well, people did give themselves up willingly, and this was after, by the way, after there were two forms of police brutality when the police just attacked. I saw a police officer beating on a man, and then 2 minutes later, I saw another police officer beating on a man, and then one of our friends got arrested. And then I think it was at that point when I realized we're all going to get arrested. And lo and behold, minutes later, we were told that if we give ourselves up willingly, we won't be charged. And I think they came to that decision because there were so many people that captured the police brutality, like the two instances of it.
How about that $4 million they got from J.P. Morgan for the police department there? How about that, eh?
That seems like just a blatant buy-off. Like, I mean, for them to do it while this was going right after the police brutality issues there, yeah. I mean, you can clearly see who's, whose interests they're most looking out for. But like, this goes back to a larger question of like the monopoly of violence. The state has a monopoly of violence in the territory that it controls, and so any, they wouldn't call it violence. Any actions they use to subdue people or anything, that is perfectly within their rights. That's not violence. They're just doing their job. It might be a bad apple. I mean, I say the whole basket is rotten. I mean, it's a systemic issue. Usually, there's almost no violence on the side of the protesters, but the media coverage of this is always violent protests, violent whatever, and most of this stuff is started by the police.
I encourage everybody to go to Wall Street. There's just something unique and incomparable that's going on over there. There's so many things in that little park that are occurring at the same time. And Anthony mentioned General Assemblies. We have General Assemblies there. They're printing off their own newspapers. I think they have their own internet now.
Occupied Wall Street Journal.
It's incredible. It's such a decent newspaper. It's a nice read going through it. And not only that, there's food available for the demonstrators that sleep there overnight. And every day it's not just the hippies that are protesting, whatever that means. It's educated people from all sorts of ages that are, I met a teacher who was arrested with us. He's a math teacher. They're journalists, they're lawyers. I also met a doctor who had been educated in England. People are saying enough is enough. We're the 99%. People are showing up with their own voices. I had my own unique voice, and my friends had their own unique voice. It was just people are saying enough, and they're showing up at these at these roads, at these bridges, and they're claiming back their right to to live, basically. We're tired of lies that politicians, what's that word? Strew or sprue?
Spew would be good.
Spew.
That's a good word for what politicians do.
Yeah.
And we just had a recent election, an all-time low of 49.7%, I think, of eligible voters. I wonder why there's an all-time record-breaking low of eligible voters showing up at the polls. We're sick and tired of, I can't even say lies.
Not a lot of faith in representative democracy.
It's corruption. There's a need, and I think it was mentioned before, there's a need to look at the system. There's something that's wrong systematically, and we need to examine it. We need to restructure, deconstruct, restructure. It might take years. Most people say it's idealistic, but it can be possible. It has happened before, and we can do it again. It might take years, but it needs to be done.
Lucy Parsons has a great quote on that point. I believe it's, never be deceived that the rich will allow you to vote away their wealth. And which really speaks the truth, because there's the political process is essentially bought off, more so in the United States, but just as much in Canada. We have just as much income disparity, I believe it's called, people say that people don't vote because they're apathetic. If they only learn more or whatever, then they get involved and stuff like that. It's that people have the right sense that, even if they participated in this skewed political process from the get-go, puppet A or puppet B, it's really not going to change anything, and I believe that's really true.
Starting up on October the 15th, the Toronto occupation. Everybody here is planning on paying a visit, and hopefully we get some good interview footage and stuff from that.
Popping by and saying hi.
Yeah, and that was basically, the whole thing seemingly was started by adbusters in Vancouver, and it spurred on the people to occupy Wall Street, and went to 25 different cities, probably even more now. Occupy Toronto is going to happen on October the 15th. How do you think that's going to go down with the conservative mayor, Mr. Ford, and all his austerity measures that he's implemented in Toronto, guys? How do you think he's going to react? What do you think the reaction is going to be in Toronto? How do you think this is going to go down?
I don't know. They might think they can demoralize people enough right off the bat to keep it from growing, like G20 style, and just break a few skulls, drag a few people off to jail and demoralize them. Especially, it's mostly young people, this whole movement. So, I think a lot of them think that the backbone is weak of this movement, and if they can really grind them down, they'll disappear and go back home. So I don't know if they're going to do that. They may feel that the public image is too risky to try that as well, because the media isn't ignoring it completely anymore. So hard to say.
As we've seen in Wall Street, when they crack down on the protests, they exponentially grow. So maybe looking at Wall Street, I'm sure they're nervous in places like Boston and everywhere else where they are cracking down.
Mm-hmm.
It's risky for them either way, right?
Yeah, and once they start cracking down, then you start seeing a lot more support from the public and stuff like that, it seems.
Like it's not a real occupation. They're pretty much letting us have these spaces, and when they choose to crack everybody's head and toss us all in jail, they will. They'll do that.
It's not the corporations that's coming in and cracking the heads. It's the state too, which a lot of people need to realize.
Right.
So
the state protecting the corporation.
This thing that's going on in Toronto, the process that I thought would probably start once the 15th commenced, seems to be already on underway, and like I'm not down there. I don't have any input myself.
I guess in a nutshell, what's at issue seems to be that a small group of people have taken it on themselves to start laying the foundation and guidelines for a lot of what's supposed to happen on the 15th and afterwards. And not everybody knows who these people are. Not everybody is in agreement with what's being decided and set up. So there's some questions being asked.
I say if you have a voice, you have a problem with something, you show up. I don't think we need to worry about the organizers and what they're doing. We're part of the organizers because we're the ones that are showing up. Without us showing up, there won't be an organization. So we don't need to worry about that. I think I have a problem with something, I'm going to show up.
Yeah.
I definitely think it'll resolve itself, especially because when we go there, and if there are still, a small group of organizers taking it on themselves to set up beforehand police liaisons, as well as like knowing that
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and knowing that a CSIS agent was in the crowd and not telling anybody, I mean, that's the big faux pas. But like, it's if there is a small amount of unaccountable people that have pretty much taken it upon themselves to start organizing this, it's great about the initiative, but again, on the 15th they need to step aside because we're not going to stand for that.
Plus, too, I know that there's a substantial amount of people from our region, London, going down, and it's amazing seeing all these different groups: Council of Canadians, Climate Justice London, Zeitgeist, We Are Change. I can go on and on and on. They're all getting together, and we're going to form our own little base camp and community. And I would imagine we'd probably have our own little public assemblies and stuff, or general assemblies as well as our community, and then go and share with the larger, assembly. Did you guys see any of that stuff go on in New York at all, or were you able to spend any time seeing how the general assemblies worked or anything down there?
I personally I missed both general assemblies while I was there. I was too busy being part of the protests, and there were so many of them. And I wish that, Mike, you'd been there too. And I know you were planning to go, but I wish you'd been there. There was like artists painting while there's yoga going on, while there's newspapers being given out, while there's like a protest that's being organized. Like everything is going on at the same time, and you're like, I want to be part of everything. But you obviously can't. You have to stay a number of days, and I was only there for 2 days.
From what I've read, they've broke it down into working groups quite a bit.
Oh,
rather
it's highly
than individual organizations, that it's more groups to get things done.
It's highly organized, though. There's fluidity, and it's the first of its kind that I've seen. So much. There's creativity too. There's room for people that didn't feel they belonged, and now they know that they belong because they see people like themselves who are struggling too. And you know what? Part of our culture, part of the Western culture is, shame in admitting that you have a problem, not being able to find a job. And suddenly all these young people are getting together and saying, you know what, this is nothing to be ashamed about. I can't find a job. And it's not because I'm not good enough. It's because the state won't let me find that job. It's all about the capitalistic ritual of keeping, the richest while the poor poorer.
Squeeze every bit you can out.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, I think we should definitely resist any kind of attempts to homogenize the movement. There's the diversity is beautiful. There's such a plurality of different backgrounds and skills that to kind of be like, we are all one. We are all one in a sense of all this stuff has got to go.
But we need our individuality still, right?
Yeah.
Even as groups and communities and stuff, like us here in London, we've got some different needs than somebody in, say, Banff, for example, right? And even though we're in the same country, we should be, getting together ourselves and facilitating and trying to figure out what we can do best for our region And then after that, then maybe, get together with these people from the different areas and talk about the things that affect all of us. You're listening to the Indignants on CHRW. We'll be right back.
Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits. The rebels. The troublemakers. The round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Welcome back to the Indignants on CHRW.
Everywhere needs to develop its own identity and mutual aid and solidarity with all these other groups that are doing the exact same thing as us and discovering themselves as well. Also, I wanted to bring up, we have just started holding general assemblies in London. Regularly draws about 30 people so far, but we're looking to expand that, get the process down a little bit more, and then there is a lot of interest here in London, but you also see a lot of organization going into Occupy Hamilton, Occupy,
Ottawa.
St. John's, Occupy Ottawa, Occupy Montreal, Occupy Vancouver. There's no reason why we can't have an Occupy London sometime soon.
Do you think people are going to be targeted, Mike, pre-October 15th?
I think people are already targeted. I think I got a bullseye on my head. And
we're all on a nice list.
Probably most of us here do somewhat.
Be on some kind of watch list.
But what are we doing, right? We're just talking about the truth. We're being honest. For me, this is beautiful because we're all able. London's fortunate because we've already been sitting at the table with each other for at least a year or two now. All these different groups and people that not necessarily see eye to eye 100% philosophically and politically, but we all work together very, very well. Mm-hmm. I think it's because we're a small city. It's not too small, 400,000 people, but we're tight in that regard. We're not spread out. And we do a lot of activities together. But for the most part, places like Toronto, it's so widespread, and little tiny divisions still seem to be there. This is giving all those people an opportunity to do what we've been doing, sit at the table and talk and try to work things out as a community. So I think that's the most wonderful thing about this whole thing. If nothing else comes of it, other than people starting to sit down and talk, I'm going to be tremendously happy.
Mm-hmm. You bring up such an excellent point of, something coming out of something, because most people think that, who are these lunatics that are going out? Protests don't do anything is the common phrase I've heard ever since I've gotten back from New York. You fool, you didn't accomplish anything in Brooklyn. Yes, I did. I stayed put, and I could have climbed the bridge rail to try to escape arrest, like I saw some people doing. And fortunately, they were not from London. But I did accomplish something. I was no longer afraid of the police. And to me, they looked like little dominoes. Yes, I saw police.
Well, see, that's awesome. You've faced your fear, and it's pretty much gone now.
Yes, and I'm not afraid to get arrested anymore. In fact, after I got back, I questioned myself why, when one of the first arrest was one of our friends, why I didn't stand in front of him to prevent the arrest. And I should have. It would have been empowering. And I think I will do it. I will do it if I get the opportunity to. I hope that our friends don't face arrest, but realistically speaking, we're going to a protest. that the government, the corporate world, is not happy with, because they feel we're no longer enslaved to, this cycle of materialism and, being dulled. We're being critical now, and we're empowering not only ourselves but our communities. So yes, there will be arrests, from what I can see, and I won't be afraid.
So we're basically no longer happy in our own servitude any longer. A lot of people, I guess. So,
There's definitely a growing consciousness, I think, of, collectively we can beat them. And they are. That's what they're terrified of. People being in the streets, questioning their power, questioning the roots of their entire system. Try to get into an argument with any kind of a politician or a banker or anything like that about the nature of democracy. I mean, it's just taken as granted that the state tells us we live in a democracy. And then, the onus is on them to prove that we do live in a democracy. And I think a lot of stuff that we've seen from the government of Canada, there's a bunch of lies that they've told us, like Canada is green. I mean, we've got one of the worst ongoing ecological disasters on the planet with the tar sands. Canada's peaceful, and it's like Canada's spent 10 years in Afghanistan.
Dropping bombs in Libya.
I mean, not to mention Haiti, as well as a lot of other locations. Sorry?
Bosnia.
Haha, and they have a hand in South America too.
Oh yeah.
Our country isn't as peaceful as we think it is.
So we shouldn't take it for granted when they tell us we live in a democracy. They tell us that we're free. People who are really free don't need to be told that they're free. We'll just know it. Mm-hmm. It's question the nature of democracy. Whether the Greeks tried representative democracy and they rejected it out of hand as being undemocratic. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely absurd that we're using this political system that doesn't represent anybody but 1%.
Right. There's lots of things that are being questioned right now. I'd say that's a really beautiful thing that's going on. People are questioning the political liberal democracy we have, the economic system, thinking about post-capitalist alternatives, thinking about new ways of doing things, new ways of structuring our society, how to deal with resource depletion, how to deal with the environmental crisis, how to deal with equality and the various problems around the world in a real way, not for a profit. I think there's things that are being discussed now that are really have been a long time coming, and it's refreshing to see this happening now.
I think we also have to be careful of more liberal reformist kind of proposals as well, considering the state of the environment. And this system does rely a lot on externalities and relentlessly consuming industry relentlessly consumes the natural world for profit. I mean, consumer culture is hugely destructive, and as long as we think we can reform away the problem, it's just not going to happen. I mean, we don't have another 150 years to sort this stuff out. This is urgent. I think that one of the problems is the international capitalist class, along with neoliberal reforms. They're not rooted in any kind of community. I mean, it's just the studies have just shown that the rich people lack empathy, and that poor people will give away more of their money than rich people. I mean, there is a psychological study to back up that.
I used to drive limousines. And the best customers I ever had were 99.9% of the time the poorest people. They always gave the best tips. Good day, everyone. This is Mike Roy of the Indignants. You can catch us on CHRW 94.9 FM in the London area or on Facebook. Today we are talking with Danny Panzella, who has been down several times to the Occupy Wall Street protests. Danny is an activist and journalist and also lives in the New York City area. So Danny, how did the Occupy Wall Street protests come about?
Well, I'm here just kind of in solidarity and covering it from my website, protestors.tv. How did it get started? There's several groups that are kind of loosely affiliated and kind of taking responsibility for the protest. Anonymous was one of them. But there is no real organization on the ground. It's done very democratically. Pretty much anybody who's willing to take part in the decision making is allowed to take part in the decision making. They take a lot of votes by raised hands, and basically the whole thing is run very grassroots democratically. That kind of works for and against them in a way. Very difficult to get a consensus to get things done sometimes.
So do you see any similarities between the M15 and Indignants movement in Europe that we've seen over the summer?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's definitely the same spirit that's sweeping across all these other countries. Absolutely. And, they stand in solidarity. Austerity is really starting to hit even in the United States. They just don't call it austerity. And I'm not just talking about cutting services. I'm talking about inflation, which is really like a hidden austerity. I'm talking about rising food prices. I'm talking about fuel costs, which basically everything to go up. So right here in New York City, we're experiencing high toll raises. They've just attempted to double the toll in New York City for all the bridges. So some of us are stuck on this island. If we don't have $15 every time we want to leave, we have to pay $15. Those are all austerity measures, and they're saying, we have to do this because the city's broke. But why is the city broke? Because Wall Street sold all these municipalities, these derivatives, and bankrupted everybody. So this was an intentional, and the reserve is just a small part. That's the American wing. But this is a global investment conspiracy where they're sucking every last bit of wealth out of the working and poorer classes, any bit of money that they have, and then denying them the services that they're paying for.
Yeah, Danny, I just watched one of your videos where the protesters came across people sipping champagne on a terrace in Wall Street. It seemed like an interesting moment. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was 55 Wall Street, which is Cipriani. Now, Cipriani is an exclusive, very high-end Wall Street club. It's a restaurant, and the restaurant's open to the public. But we're talking the cream of the Wall Street crowd. So here you have a private party going on at Cipriani, and there's this terrace, and, if you look at the video, it's this Greek revival style building, and, it just had this very, this feel of it reminded me what must have been happening right before the fall of Rome, where the last of the oligarchs were kind of enjoying their wealth before it hit critical mass and just collapsed. So you have these Wall Street bankers kind of sipping champagne, literally sipping champagne out of these flute glasses on this terrace, overlooking these what they must have described as a ragamuffin group of protesters, angry about the opulence of Wall Street and how the rest of the 99% of the population is suffering at their pleasure. And I don't think many of these people really consciously understand what is happening. A lot of them, I'm sure many of them do. But this is just a corrupt system that these people have been raised in. Most of these people, it's a very, I use the word incestuous loosely, but, this class of people, they marry into each other's families. They keep the wealth within 1%. So, you've got this kind of where they have no perspective anymore. They grow up in this bubble, and they have no perspective of what it's like to live as a poor or middle-class person. And, I think that they laugh, and they don't understand when people are protesting. Sometimes I've heard people make comments that, they just want to be stuff. They're socialists. They just want everything given to them. But that's really not the case. I mean, certainly there may be a small minority of socialists who just want freedom. And I actually personally don't advocate for a socialist system, but I can understand that these people are looking for a more fair distribution. They're railing against capitalism, but really what their problem is with the monopoly corporate capitalism.
I've noticed that there's a diverse cross-section of people, like anarchists, anarcho-capitalists, libertarians, socialists, communists, and just regular folk. What do you think they have in common, all these people?
Well, I think they all recognize the problem, and one of the guys I interviewed, he was a free market libertarian, and he said it best. We all see the same problem, and we may all disagree on the solution, but let's unify together to identify the problem, to expose it to the majority of people, and then we can go from there and hash out the solutions after. I mean, whether you're a socialist or a free market guy or an anarchist, you can agree that ending the Federal Reserve, the monopoly corporate system, is the first step to solving the problem.
Do you think the Federal Reserve Bank is more responsible than, say, Wall Street, or are they the same creature?
Well, the Fed is Wall Street. I mean, the Fed is owned by the top guys on Wall Street. The top banks are the shareholders of the Fed. So you've got Chase, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. These are the guys that, when you say Wall Street, it's a euphemism for those basically the top 10 or 15 banks. And those are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. They're the guys that really run the show. You've got the Federal Reserve Board, which is a federal agency, and that Federal Reserve Board is supposed to regulate the banks, but they don't. They stack that regulatory agency with executives from those banks. So how could they? They've given the foxes the keys to the hen house. So there is no regulation. And that goes with that's the same modus operandi they use, the same protocol they use for every industry. The health industry is regulated by big pharma and drug executives, drug company executives. So they use the same type of
revolving door,
it was the same revolving door for every regulatory agency. That's why it's really just a big joke.
So how many people were at the start of this, and how many are there now?
Well, on Saturday, we had, I would say, about 2,000 people. And now, during the week, it's been considerably less. I would say there's about 200 to 300 here. It fluctuates. When people get off work, a lot of people come down and join. You've got about 200 hardcore people that are here, sleeping here.
There were some arrests that I seen online. What happened with that?
Yeah, there have been several arrests. For the most part, from the people that I've interviewed, for the most part, the police are very cooperative and even sympathetic to what's happening here. I think a lot of them are feeling the effects of the Wall Street bailouts as well. And, I think that they're very sympathetic. Every once in a while, it seems like the NYPD has to come in and exercise its authority and just kind of remind the protesters that the NYPD is in charge. So they're allowing people to sleep in the park, which is illegal technically, but they are not allowing people to set up tents. So it's always a little bit of give and take. We'll let you stay here. You can't put up any tents. So, you've always got somebody who gets a little too aggressive with the police or for the comfort level, and then they'll arrest them for something like disorderly conduct. A few people were arrested for chalking writing with chalk on the sidewalk, and they arrested them for vandalism. But it's really not an arrest, because what they do is, and I've had this happen to me, they take offenses that are really just violations. So they're going to write you a ticket. But what they do is they make a show. They put you in handcuffs, they put you in the car, they bring you down to the station. They make it as uncomfortable and inconvenient as possible. And then they just take you to the station, they write you a ticket, and they let you go. So they'll hold you for a few hours. That seems to be what they're doing for the most part, because, riding on the sidewalk, vandalism is that's a violation. That's a ticket at best. Using a bullhorn. Somebody was arrested this morning for using a bullhorn. Again, it's a violation. It's a ticket. So they just it's this security theater where they go through the motion to basically, for the rest of the protesters to say, look, we're going to arrest you if you guys step too far out of line. There were a couple of people that were arrested for wearing masks. which is illegal. It's illegal to wear masks at political protests. One court decision, I wrote about this morning on truthbroad.tv, one court decision had ruled it is unconstitutional to deny people wearing masks, and then the new Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor, ruled, she's a New York judge, she ruled, she overturned that decision and said, well, we have to balance free speech with, the police ability to provide security. So they see wearing masks as a security threat. Now, it's my opinion, and obviously the first court, the Southern District Court's opinion, that wearing masks at a political rally is political speech, especially a Guy Fawkes mask. I mean, that's making a very specific political statement to wear that mask. So that's freedom of political expression, and that is constitutionally protected speech. Absolutely. And then they have the little loophole that says, oh, Halloween, you're okay because there's a masquerade loophole. So if it's for the purposes of entertainment, it's fine. So there were a few people that were arrested for that. And yesterday morning, they came in, and there were tarps. It was raining. There were tarps over some of the computer equipment, and the police told the occupants to remove the tarps, and they tried to reason with the cops and say, it's raining, we don't want the equipment, and the cops didn't want to hear it. They just started pulling the tarps off themselves, and some people tried to keep the tarps and kind of got into a tug of war with the tarps, and they ended up getting manhandled and arrested.
Well, thanks for listening to the Indignants. This next section is what's happening in London, since we put this together long after the October 7th date that this was recorded. Just going to say that we were planning on going to Occupy Toronto on October the 15th, and Occupy London was just a twinkle in many people's eyes. So normally this would get filled in with what's happening, but because we're sort of going back into the Wayback Machine, I'm just going to stick a little bit of this in for filler, just so you know that this is what we're going to do at the end of the show. Thank you, and thanks for listening to the Indignants.